Hello, everybody. It's October 17th, Kudan Open Lab seminar here from Tallinn, live, hybrid, with Luba Elliott, who joined us for today's talk, which is about AI art finding its place in many different places, I guess. And so basically, this is the third time we do this in this room, I think. We updated our video game, so there's better camera. And so I will hand over the stage to Luba. There is approximately 40 minutes talk, and then there is open discussion. And you can just share your screen, and you can start.
Okay, great. Yes, I'll share screen and then from beginning. Great. Okay, so I'm going to stand up because it feels weird to me to be giving a talk sitting down. So, yeah, really excited to be here in Tallinn and, yeah, talking about AI art here. And, yeah, normally I start off with kind of an overview of some of the projects I've done over the past few years because I feel like every kind of curator or participant in the space has their own journey that really influences kind of the eye they take and what they value. And yeah, so I studied languages at university, then I spent some time working in startups, and yeah, at some point around the time of DeepDream, I became interested in AI art, and I set up a meetup in London, where I frequently invited researchers from DeepMind or one of the local universities to present their work, and then also artists to kind of showcase what they were doing. And yeah, that kind of got a lot of people, I think, excited in the space, even though it was only kind of in London. I could see that there were lots of interested people worldwide, and yeah, that presented me with lots of different opportunities, like curating kind of exhibitions. This one I did at a library in one of the Cambridge University colleges for kind of a CFI conference, and I worked with the Impact Festival in the Netherlands in 2018, and that was, I think, my first experience of working with a media arts institution where I suppose you have to like write lots of grants and you know, spend a lot of time critically developing a program of I think events, talks and exhibitions. And then I also work with business clients like COGEX AI conference in the UK. And I think when I curated this for them, they only gave me like a week or two notice. And they printed some of these works and put them on easels, which wasn't really my decision. And I'm not sure if the artist would have liked that himself. But, you know, to them, this is what kind of art looks like and should be displayed as. So, you know, I'm always quite flexible, I think, in terms of how I work with clients. So they did that. And yeah, I'm quite well known for organizing and setting up the NeurIPS Creativity Workshop, which I did for 4 years until the pandemic hit. And also, yeah, I got a bit bored and tired of it because it is very time intensive. And these things always need new ideas. So now I think it's still being continued. So if you are attending the NeurIPS conference, or even if you're not attending, because the workshop is actually online, and I think Tom White still is running it. So hopefully there will be kind of new art and research for you to see. And yeah, as part of that, I set up this online gallery, yeah, which had all the submissions that were accepted to the workshop from the kind of art space. And I think it was a nice snapshot of AI art, probably from DeepDream to the GAN era. So it doesn't contain all the new text-to-image stuff. And that is, I think, quite a new field in itself. Yeah, so over the pandemic years, I've been working on the Art and AI Festival in Leicester, which is the city where I live in the UK. And it doesn't have much art-wise, so it was quite nice to put some screens in a shopping centre, in a hospital, and kind of out in some of the public spaces. I did an exhibition with Arbeit that was a browser plugin, because like I guess during COVID, it was tricky to figure out how to do exhibitions, and we didn't want to do just the gallery page where you could scroll through artwork. So we made a plugin that you kind of downloaded, and you had pop-ups that showed you the work kind of at certain points in the day. And yeah, with the kind of NFT movement, I also curated an exhibition for Feral File, which is one of these platforms that was founded by Casey Reas of, I think, processing kind of fame background. And I think with Feral File, they've tried to make the exhibitions very affordable. So in the exhibitions I did, I think each work was probably under $200. And yeah, some of these artists like Mary Klingerman and Anna Ridler are quite well known now. So I think they've done well, or the people who bought the first drop have done well on secondary. Yeah, so now I will kind of start my overview of AI art that I normally give. When I started giving this talk, it felt like it was quite contemporary, and then yeah, it became, I think, more and more historical, and I always kind of think, like, what should I take out and what should I add? But yeah, I think with the new kind of movements with the text to image, they have some of their own challenges, which I'll probably talk about later. So I still feel very much attached to some projects like DeepDream, which I don't know how familiar you are with it, but there is like Memo Acton, one of the artists who works in the AI art space, and I guess the algorithm looks at the image, it gets excited by particular features, they turn multicolored, and you get all these crazy shapes. So yeah, that's DeepDream, and I still really like it, even though it's like really old now. And I find it interesting because I guess it's an example of an algorithm being creative, because you have the image and then you get something in like crazy colors and shapes that you might not have expected. And yeah, so this came out of Google, I think in 2015, and it was kind of the first time the mainstream got excited by AI art. And actually, I don't think too many artists were working with DeepDream. The only kind of artist who, in my view, makes interesting work is Daniel Ambrosio, who's been doing kind of these series of computational photography landscapes with kind of DeepDream shapes and colors added on. And then he has also made it a bit cubist in some of his newer work. And yeah, I think these projects are quite cool, because I think some artists who are using DeepDream, it was kind of almost too much DeepDream and too much technique, but in the case of Daniel Ambrosio, you can still see I think the subject matter of the painting, and the technique is not too overpowering, so it's a good example. Then came style transfer, so when you could change kind of your photograph into Monet painting or something like that. And when I first began attending all these AI conferences, AI art was style transfer, right? So everybody was like, oh, if you work in AI art, you must really like style transfer. And I think Google Research and all these companies, they were spending a lot of time to kind of develop and advance all these methods for style transfer to get it to improve. But of course, if you would talk to somebody from the computational creativity or the art community, they would be maybe a little bit horrified, because, of course, the work artists do today is like, normally they don't want to be a pastiche or to replicate a style from an old artist. They want to do something new, to make a new style themselves, or to say something new. So. Yeah, and I think that's what also attracted me to the field in many ways, because there are so many kind of different communities that had their own ideas of what art or AI art was, and what problems or challenges the field kind of had. So yeah, I think that was, but yeah, an example of, I guess, of how style transfer in theory could be interesting is, I think, if you kind of broadened the term style to include calligraphy or kind of Google Maps or something like that. And then, of course, came the GAN, which was kind of very dominant for a long period of time. And yeah, I think the first GANs were not so good. So this is kind of one of the earlier works by Mario Klingemann, probably from maybe like 2016 or 17. And yeah, it exhibits some of the problems of the early GAN models, in that you know, kind of the facial features are maybe a little bit kind of in the wrong place. Also, like here, you can see that some of the arms are like sticking out at weird angles. So as the AI community would say, there are problems with like counting or structure or things like that. And I think certainly as a curator, and I think some artists would probably share my point of view, it's like these things that made some of those algorithms interesting in the first place, because they presented, kind of trained on the data, they presented a new vision of what maybe the human form or the human face could be like. And yeah, so this is also kind of the Francis Bacon era of AI art. So yeah, poor Mario, I think he's had to kind of put up with a lot of people saying, oh, this looks just like Francis Bacon. And yeah, I don't think Mario particularly cares about Francis Bacon or was in any way inspired by the artist, but I guess it just so happens that when the GAN systems of that time looked at kind of the data set of the human form, that this is kind of what they were able to produce. So yeah, but then of course they got better, and yeah, this is a work by Scott Eaton, who is, I think, really good at working with the human form and the anatomy. And I like this work because it kind of is so, it has the realism of the better GAN models, but also kind of the weird shapes that are still reminiscent of the earlier models. And yeah, so once kind of, once I think these GAN models got really good, I think in some ways it became trickier for artists to work with them, because, yeah, they couldn't rely so much on the glitches or the errors. They had to kind of focus much more strongly on the narrative or the meaning of the work, which I think earlier on wasn't really so crucial. And yeah, so now I'll kind of show you some projects which I think are trying to be a bit more inventive. So this is a work by Ivona Tao, and this is hopefully a video that we'll play. So in this work, instead of learning, she has tried to make the machine kind of forget. So I think you can see it kind of starts off being quite well generated, and then it kind of degrades to what some of the earlier iterations would have been like. And yeah, then Terry Broad had a project where there were two neural networks that were somehow, I think, operating without much data. So I think they were kind of speaking with each other. And yeah, so this is one of the projects that was submitted to, I think, the last live NeurIPS creativity workshop we did. And I certainly remember that he was coming up with kind of a novel method for it too. And yeah, Jake Elves has been doing interesting work. And what I like about this project called Cusp is that, yeah, he trained a GAN to generate some images of birds, but then he kind of put this screen out into the marshes. So you can see there are like live birds kind of moving in the background. And I think that's really cool to kind of put out some of those screens into a natural environment and see how other creatures would interact with it. I mean, I don't think there was much interaction here in the end, but I think it's it's a nice concept and a more kind of advanced thinking around the user experience and display. Minne Atairo is an artist based in New York, and she was looking, I think, at the arts of the Benin Republic, and I think there were some gaps in the in the art history, and then kind of she was trying to fill them by getting the AI trained on these kind of ceremonial heads and objects to kind of generate versions of what could have existed at that point in time. Also, maybe if there weren't any kind of colonizing forces in the Republic at that point in time. So it's quite cool. And Ben Snell, so he trained an AI on lots of different designs of sculptures from antiquity to contemporary art. And what was good about his work is that he destroyed the computer that made the generations and made it into dust. And then he made the sculpture out of this dust. So I think, I think that is quite interesting because, of course, it kind of links to some of the work artists were doing in the 20th century when they were kind of destroying their work. And it's kind of a more advanced, I think, concept rather than just training a GAN on some data set and using the finished product as the final work. And then, now I'll mention some artists that focus on the data part of the process, because of course that is, I guess, a very important component. And Anna Ridler is one of those artists, and this is actually a work I commissioned for the Impact Festival, like a few years ago now. So Anna came to the Netherlands, she bought lots of tulips, took 10,000 pictures, and then she proceeded to kind of classify them and print them out. And of course, she trained a GAN on those images to kind of generate some beautiful tulips that were normally kind of shown in a video form. And when she exhibits these works, she always exhibits them together with the data set. So if you've been to any kind of AI art exhibitions recently, you might have come across this work because it's like on a wall and there's like probably 1,000 of these kind of little photographs up on the wall. And again, this is a really good way of kind of thinking about, I think, the visitor experience and of kind of showcasing also the importance of the data set and of the human labor involved. Because I think frequently a lot of AI artists, they kind of use some sort of data set, and then the focus is almost exclusively on the final kind of image, and the data set frequently isn't even really mentioned. And so Anna Ridler wanted to highlight the data set and also kind of the human labor that has been involved in it, which is, I think, frequently minimalized. Also before the NFT hype, she made this project called Bloemenveiling, where you could buy an NFT, I think, of a flower that kind of wilted and self-destroyed in 7 days, because of course flowers don't exist forever. And I think this is a really cool project, again, because I think a lot of artists are working with NFTs, or partly because it's a great way of making money and maybe reaching new audiences. But in Anna's case, I think the project was quite inventive because she was able to kind of link the duration of the flower blooming to kind of the duration of how long the work would show for. Helena Siren probably has the most unique aesthetic in AI art, and I really like her work. She also kind of works with her own data sets, and I think she kind of looks at different mediums like photography, newspaper, I think engraving, etching. And if you look at some of those images, particularly the one on the right, I think there's a mixture of photography and newspaper and something else there. And this really kind of gives her a very unique aesthetic. And of course, she trains and chains various GANs to make it happen. And yeah, I've brought this project back into my presentation by Roman Lipski. He is an artist based in Berlin, and this also was done quite a while ago, but I think to me this project illustrates how you can kind of use AI in your process without ending up with a purely kind of digital image. So yeah, Roman Lipski, he was painting various landscapes, and this is, I think, his kind of normal style. And he worked with a team of technologists who made him an AI that was then kind of trained on his landscape images to produce an image in his style. And yes, you can kind of see some of the things that were maybe quite similar to his style. So yeah, there's lots of kind of warm colors, but I think those images contain more color than is typical in Lipski's work. So this was interesting for Lipski in a way, because he looked at the generated images and was then kind of inspired to draw this, which represented a stylistic development for him. So yeah, there are maybe kind of more and slightly different colors in this series of works. And then again, those works went kind of into the machine and it was trained on them to produce this result, which, yes, some, I think, quite horrible colors there. But yeah, very abstract and again, quite different. And yeah, this is what Roman Lipski wrote and painted in response. And just to kind of showcase the beginning and the end products, yeah, to me, this shows quite a stylistic development from something that is more realist to something that is like quite abstract and also quite different in terms of color. And yeah, I think all of these were primarily, I think, oil paintings. And yeah, this shows that you don't have to kind of yeah, just make purely digital work. You can also incorporate AI as kind of part of your process and continue working in whatever I think kind of niche or medium you began with. Yeah, also yeah, this project by Robbie Barrett and Ronan Barrault, so Ronan Barrault is a French artist. He was like painting various paintings, and at the end, when he kind of finished the painting, he used whatever he had on his palette to paint a skull. So he had a data set of maybe like 30 or 50 skulls, which Robbie Barrett worked on to kind of generate some skulls. And I think both of these are kind of, yeah, generations, so they are quite different. And what I found interesting about the project was that once those images were generated, Ronan Barrault then came along and kind of made some corrections with kind of oil paint on top of these kind of digital prints to kind of almost like correct the algorithm as to where it might have been kind of going wrong from his perspective. So again, I think a nice kind of yeah, interaction or like back and forth between the AI and the artist that is very much visible in the final work. And yeah, now we move closer to modern times with DALL-E and Clip, which I guess came out at the beginning of last year. And yeah, then artists began working with Clip or yeah, so I showed you the DeepDream video in the beginning of kind of same artist doing similar type of thing. And yeah, this video I think he did last summer. So, and however I try to record it, this quality always goes down. But I think if you go on YouTube, you can see it in slightly higher quality. But yeah, this kind of showcases how much the field has kind of moved on in the space of maybe like 5 or 6 years. So because yeah, these are kind of much more kind of yeah, realistic and higher quality imaginations kind of made by the algorithm. And yeah, Vadim Epstein has been, yeah, I think working with clip and various kind of models. I think this is based on his project called Aphantasia, which kind of also maybe includes some DeepDream-esque elements. And I think he has, he makes quite an interesting aesthetic, and also tries to think and kind of, make some narratives around kind of science and physics, which unfortunately I can't remember off the top of my head. But I think his aesthetic is one of the more interesting ones post kind of DALL-E clip. And then what do I have next? Maneki Neko is an artist I've actually curated for an exhibition that hopefully will eventually launch online with the Hong Kong-based platform called Screens Guru. And it's been like forever delayed, but maybe eventually you will see it. But if not, at least it exists in this presentation. So Maneki Neko, is an artist. I think she was working with Ru DALL-E for this particular project. And again, with a lot of these text-to-image generated images, I think the aesthetic to me feels quite different. So in many ways, I'm kind of happy that she's made this image, which is, I think, kind of very busy. You have all these lots of like faces and natural forms. And from what I understand, she kind of made a collage of all the different generations that she got from the model, and it's quite beautiful. And Mario Klingerman made Botto. So I think also kind of drawing onto the DAO and the NFT kind of hype, he also has a community of a few thousand people. And whenever Botto generates works, the community have to vote which one goes on sale. And I think it was launched. So they're going to have a celebration in London later this month. So it was launched around a year ago. And in the first few weeks, it made over $1 million euros sales. And I thought that was pretty good. And DALL-E 2, of course, things improve in terms of how they are generated. And Anna Ridler got one of the early kind of access invitations, and then she was kind of generating more tulips, and you can kind of see how much the technology has moved on, and also how different the generations are. So I guess when Anna was using a GAN and her own data set, she got all these kind of individual tulips that she had to either like put together in a grid or like keep separate. And here, this is maybe kind of much more similar to the tulips you might find if you zoom in a very kind of golden age Dutch painting with lots of tulips in one frame, because clearly I guess those would have been also part of the data set. And one of the, I think, good ways of using text-to-image generators is to kind of using them as a potential visualization tools for things that we might kind of struggle with, right? So making a zebra flamingo. So one is more flamingo, one is more zebra. And this is an example from Sophia Crespo. And one of the things I haven't seen enough of in, in artists who work with text-to-image generators is kind of looking at the errors or kind of the specifics of some of these tools, like some of the earlier GAN artists were kind of doing. And so Magnus Norden, so I think somebody had like started a Twitter thread to encourage people to kind of submit some of the failed generations. And Magnus Norden shared this image where you've got these like hands that have too many fingers. And I guess it's interesting that it is probably, again, an error of counting, but everything, of course, is generated to a much higher quality than it was in the past. And Jake Elves again. This is closed loop from probably 2016 or 2017, when text-to-image generators were like not a thing. So here you have two neural networks. One generates images based on text, and the other generates text based on image. So I guess in a way it's these two neural networks trying to communicate with each other. And it's also interesting to observe kind of what state-of-the-art technology was like back then. And also I think if you watch kind of this video long enough, at some point it gets stuck maybe around the point of a blue sofa. So then it's kind of no new variations of kind of the image or the text or interpreted. So yeah. And yeah, just going to include some kind of contemporary NFT AI art projects. You probably are familiar with the aesthetic, but still they are now kind of part of my presentation. And I always kind of struggle to figure out which ones I should include, because as a curator, I don't find them too appealing, apart from maybe the visual sense. So some of these images are quite pretty, but very few artists actually focus on the narrative or the concept or kind of developing the idea beyond the image. And that's probably partly because a lot of this art was designed to be put on OpenSea or one of these NFT platforms so that it can then be sold, as opposed to being included in a museum exhibition where I think standards are sometimes much more rigorous. But yeah, Claire Silver is one of the artists who I think have emerged in this new text-to-image era, and she's got maybe like 50 or 60,000 followers on Twitter, and yeah, she generates lots of pretty images. Ganbrood also makes some different works. It's just, oh yeah, it's uploaded. And yeah, so I think, again, the aesthetic here sometimes is quite beautiful, but then again, Bas Uterweg has a background in photography, so I imagine that there's also some of kind of post-processing and tweaking involved that makes some of these images kind of more special. And yeah, NFT Unity, kind of yeah, bringing in an watercolor aesthetic. And yeah, Jason Allen, whose work won the first prize in the Colorado State Fair and generated, I think, a lot of controversy on Twitter, because not everybody was sure that the judges who judged the competition understood kind of what tools Jason Allen was using and kind of the extent of his involvement, as opposed to kind of the computer just generating it all. And yeah, I remember Jason Allen was kind of writing that, you know, he spent weeks trying out different prompts and seeing what they were generating to then kind of fine tune it to generate this particular image. And so it sounded like it did kind of involve quite a lot of his effort. But on the other hand, to me, this looks very much like the typical kind of yeah, Mid-Journey or DALL-E aesthetic that the internet is kind of flooded with. And yeah, sometimes I might feel a bit kind of sad for all those like 100% human artists who were kind of also participating in this show and yeah, didn't win. But yeah, I'd be curious to see how this will develop further. Because yeah, of course, all these platforms like Getty Images, and then I was looking at these kind of smaller communities that were all kind of banning AI-generated content, yeah, I think for a variety of reasons. And yeah, I think this, of course, remains a topic for discussion, but I think a lot of artists who work on platforms such as DeviantArt, yeah, they produce their work and then they maybe upload it, and then like this work becomes part of the data sets that all these AI systems are trained on. And so they can, I guess these systems can then kind of produce very kind of, I guess, good work precisely because of all these human artists who spent time making the work that became part of the data set. And yeah, it is probably quite sad for them, but it presents kind of new opportunities to incorporate this technology into their work, and it will be interesting to see if some kind of blockchain-related mechanisms might eventually be introduced to kind of get any artists who became part of the data set eventually some money down the line, but I'm not sure. And yeah, how much longer do I have? A few minutes, right?
Yeah, you can go on.
I can go, yeah, so okay, I'll present some of the projects that I like still. Yeah, so like this one, Scott Kelly and Ben Polkinghorne. So yeah, now I'm going to present some projects which are basically not really generative, that look at slightly different AI tools. And yeah, this one looks at recommendation systems. And yeah, so these two guys, they work in advertising in New Zealand. So they kind of put up these billboards in national parks, also to kind of block a slide to showcase you the extent technology kind of rules our life, also kind of how we are influenced by these recommendation systems. Because yeah, if you shop on like Amazon or somewhere, this is the type of box you're probably used to see. So not in a national park, of course, where you come to be disconnected. Yeah, Gretchen Andrew does some very interesting work around kind of search engines. And yeah, so she used to work at Google at some point, and then she decided she wanted to be an artist. So yeah, this is an example of some of her work. Yeah, so you can see kind of flower scenes made with kind of different types of materials. And what she's known for is kind of yeah, working with search engine optimization to ensure that if you type in a particular search string in quotation marks and click on images, you will get her works as some of the top image results. So again, I think this is quite a kind of, yeah, quite an interesting way of yeah, figuring out how you can influence some of these powerful Google systems, and yeah, also maybe gain attention of collectors or kind of art people that way. Shing Sung-Bak, Kim Young-hong, two artists working in South Korea. And so they worked with portrait painters and told them to work with a facial recognition camera that was looking at the portrait that was being painted. And in the final portrait, the facial recognition camera must not recognize a face. So in these kind of portraits you see, they are not a face to the facial recognition system. And I think they are quite interesting in some ways, kind of what the artist does to try and, I guess, confuse the system. So I think the image on the left took me a very long time to like find a face in, but then I think if you kind of look sideways, you can see that maybe the face is actually turned. But again, yeah, quite different, I think, styles of portraits. And I think here the facial recognition system really kind of inspires creativity. And yeah, Mati Mariansky, so this was a work that was submitted to, I think, one of the last NeurIPS creativity workshops that I did. And it got the most attention on Twitter out of all the possible kind of beautiful GAN-generated works. It was this one that everybody was excited about. And that's, I think, because the artist was working with an evolutionary algorithm, and I think there was like a curve generator that he was trying to kind of make it look like a face. And these were some of the generations, which I think are quite elegant, and again, a very different interpretation of a face. And yeah, Tom White has been working with kind of object recognition for a while, and in this work, the image on the left is supposed to be a starfish, and if you show this image to all the image recognition systems, this is what kind of the basic representation of a starfish would be like. But of course, if I was kind of communicating with humans, I would probably draw something that has kind of, I don't know, 5 or however many points. And I think that would be a more effective way to demonstrate a starfish. But of course, kind of, object recognition systems might work differently. So they need a different representation of a starfish. And yeah, I think that's quite an interesting kind of gulf in perception. Kirill Benzi has a project called These Are Not Flowers, and if you look on the sides, you have bell pepper, comic book, strawberry, cottage butterfly, and these things, and they kind of show what kind of images make part of these kind of so-called flowers. And yeah, this was a video, but I think I only kept the screenshot. But yeah, these do look more like flowers than I think this particular screenshot. And yeah, Nuf Algervasia. So she was working with an image segmentation algorithm to kind of look at the data sets of photographs she was able to find in Saudi Arabia, and trying to erase the colonial kind of stereotypes and perceptions of the people there. So when, and to kind of to present the culture as it would have been there without kind of the colonial impact. So that's why some kind of parts of the image are erased, because she wasn't able to find, I think, kind of enough local, enough local historical documentation. And yeah, Harm van den Dorpel, I think. Yeah, so Harm van den Dorpel, let's see if, again, I made a video. Yes, I did. Yeah, so he was using some, I think, kind of turtle-based, turtle graphics-based algorithm, where you had, you had two of these images that were parents, and then, they generate lots of like children, so lots of different kind of versions. And then you as a user, again, could pick two parents, and then they would kind of generate more children until all those images converged into something kind of very similar. And that became a supreme artwork that was then kind of printed and framed and became an artwork. So, yeah, so I always find that even though I think some of these evolutionary systems are very popular in some strands of the computational creativity community, in the recent wave of kind of AI art, they've been somewhat underrepresented, particularly maybe before kind of GAN breeder and things like that became popular. So I think it was nice to see works by Harm van den Dorpel. And I think maybe I will end at, I'll end with Dries, because it's quite cool, and then we can, get started on the discussion. So Dries is an artist who is probably quite well known for making quite, I think, viral apps. So at one point he had an app called Die With Me, which you could only kind of use if your battery was under 10%. And I think for a while it was like very high up on the kind of App Store charts, because it is quite a cool project. So yeah, if you use the app, then it would connect you to other people who also had under 10% battery, and you could chat with them.
Before that, okay.
Yeah, so it's not super AI related, so that's why it's not here. But yeah, this one is a bit different. So this one is a few weeks old, and so I think he's using kind of he's using some sort of data to basically figure out where and how the image was taken. And I think a lot of kind of people were quite shocked about it when they saw it on Twitter. And I think it is shocking in many ways, but it's also good that it kind of raises questions again into kind of the extent of surveillance and things like that. And I think, we're going to skip that. And now we can, move on to the discussion or whatever else is supposed to follow.
Thank you very much.
Should I stop sharing?
What we can do it like this. So if you want to bring something up, we can. Does it make sense?
Okay.
You want to sit down or like?
I don't know, maybe. I mean, I can sit down. I mean,
Okay, whatever you want. Whatever you prefer.
Figure it out.
So, yeah, thank you very much. This was an excellent overview of sort of the history of AI art in some sense. I loved when you said we're getting into the more contemporary era last year. This is a year old, which is quite fun. And so one of the interesting things, which I think is quite surreal, you told us at the lunch that you worked for a company that collected artworks in contemporary art collections. So you get a really broad overview of what that entails. And that is really so new, that the stuff you're doing right now, that at the same time, it didn't have the time to fold out completely, but at the same time, it's so unbelievably rich. There's so much going on. It's like my starting question to you is like, how do you find your way around in what's going on? Or is it just hanging out at the Red Street corner?
Yes, I think it's kind of always that, right? But yeah, so for a while I used to kind of run a newsletter on creative AI and spend a long time, I think, on kind of Twitter, following the right people, and then also kind of additionally looking at what some media art and maybe contemporary art publications and institutions were kind of posting to try and get an overview of what the different communities were doing. But at some point it became kind of too much work, and also with the NFT kind of boom, I wasn't sure where to take it next, so I've kind of dropped that. But I think Twitter is the place for a lot of this kind of AI art discussion, because it still feels to me that the artists working with AI are very close to the developers. So whenever I think Google or OpenAI, one of these companies, whenever they release a paper, it's possible to talk with the researchers on Twitter, and everybody kind of benefits from the discussion. And I think Twitter's great, and then certainly various, I think, kind of in-person conferences and events are also helpful.
Mm-hmm. There's a question over there.
Yeah, this is actually Tasvir has also, but maybe I can go first. This is a question from a person who comes from outside of AI art and historian and like that. So you mentioned somehow kind of like at the beginning of your talk, particularly a couple of times development and kind of like how this AI art has been developing. So how do you see kind of like what drives development in AI art? Is it kind of like testing new things? Is it algorithms? Is it using different kinds of like databases or images as a base? Or is there a pattern, or is it kind of like, does the development and ideas come from from various places, and how do you see the concept of development here?
Yeah, interesting question. So I guess in the AI art I look at, it's most closely kind of related to the art made by artists, working with the latest technologies developed by big tech. So that's why I start with DeepDream, then I guess it's style transfer, GANs, and now there's all these like text to image generators, because that's what I think has been new, and that's what artists who've been entering the field over the past, I think, 5 or 7 years have been engaging with, even though, of course, there are kind of lots of artists who've been working with, I think, facial recognition and, machine learning or statistics-based systems, and also evolutionary algorithms kind of for a much longer period of time. And there are also communities, maybe like the computational creativity community or the computer art community, that have slightly different, I think, values and metrics and would probably have a very kind of different presentation of artworks. So this is very much kind of geared to my interests and the fields that I've been kind of working most closely with, and that I also think have been kind of linked to the recent popularity in kind of AI art. So I hope that sort of answers.
That's sort of interesting. It never struck me like this, but this is basically classic art history, right? Which was the narrative of how do people strive to, for example, depict a human body most realistically, or how to depict a landscape and capture it realistically. So this strive to keep abreast with technology is obviously the most natural way to tell the story, but the question we probably all ask ourselves, and don't get me wrong, it's not a critique because you're one of the first who tells that story in a really compelling way, but how many different ways are there to tell that story about AI art that are actually countering that particular, sort of the straightforward thing is like, let's do the newest thing, right? Like, do you think the great majority of artists is following that in a sort of hysterical manner, or is there actually a majority of artists which haven't unfolded yet in their importance because they actually have completely contrary motivations to work with that kind of stuff? Do you think we look at the same things that you just showed us in 30 years, for example?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, because I think, in art history, time kind of changes everything in some respects. So I'd be curious to see who would still be popular in let's say 30 years or so. So I guess in my case, it is a collection of artists primarily working with these tools. I mean, maybe there are some that I've kind of neglected, and maybe other curators have also neglected, but I do think those who are kind of active and are keen to engage with the technological space, because that's kind of the field I think I'm personally closely linked to. I was always organizing this NeurIPS workshop. I also did a workshop on computer vision and art at kind of related conferences. So I think it was always kind of very possible for artists to contact me. I think if people continue to value those technologies, then probably it would be some of those artists that they would maybe continue valuing. But I think because art is also so much about concept and narrative, it's also like whoever is able to build kind of the strongest case there that probably survives.
Tasvir, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you. It was really very nice presentation, and you covered a lot of good work that the community is doing in the field of art, computer vision, and machine learning and AI. I am really inspired by your presentation and your deep study on it. I have a question like that. You mostly covered that. It's actually true that most of the work with the deep learning and the artwork is based on GAN, generative adversarial network, because like the DeepDream or this kind of stuff, because you are going to create or give some new thought on the images or like that. Actually, I am also doing something like this, which is related to the detection and segmentation of the artwork in the images. So I want to ask that what's your take on it for the annotation of the data annotation, because it's a big problem when we are going to address image artwork segmentation or artwork detection, because currently this domain is underrepresented as compared to the other computer vision main task. So people need to label a lot of data, or otherwise the algorithms are not so good, or otherwise they have to develop some techniques which are semi-supervised learning or unsupervised learning. So I want to ask that how long this journey is going on with the semi-supervised or unsupervised learning for the field of artwork, deep learning, using the semi-supervised learning or the unsupervised learning. Mainly data annotation problem. Basically, actually, I am going to talk about the data annotation problem because data is not sufficient. Data is not available for most of the task or is being developed.
Well, so I think, yeah, the artists who kind of, make AI art, they think they work with a range of data sets, right? Some that are kind of available online, others that they kind of make themselves. And I think they choose how to kind of, annotate them. And yeah, it's probably like a form of bias that kind of is then incorporated into the data set, but then that is kind of fully owned by the artist, and it's kind of their perspective that they're making happen. But yeah, I'm not really kind of as closely involved with kind of developing the technology and doing the kind of the annotation work myself or kind of the training. So I wouldn't be able to give you kind of any particular tips on what they do to kind of to deal with the problem.
Maybe I can ask a related question, which you will be very well aware of as a curator. So, how bounded do you think is the AR production? Like, how much is the style we see determined by what's possible? Like, in some sense, we have the constant storytelling that AI is general, can do everything. You can produce every image. Drawing, and painters will go out of business. But then the more you look at it, it's not the case. There's like, you can spot it, and you can even spot, oh, this was like last year March. So how much is that something that is widening out, or are we still in these? Are we just going from one bucket to another in terms of style?
Yeah, I guess if you think about how a lot of these AI systems work, right, they're kind of being trained on data sets, so let's say on images that already exist. So I guess it's kind of already images from the past. Mm-hmm. And therefore, and and the algorithms are being optimized to make kind of images that are similar to the data set. So yeah, I guess that's why they make art, if they work well, that is similar to the data set. And for me as a curator, it is more interesting when something goes wrong and they come up with a weird kind of generation of a human body or something like that, or when an artist or a technologist is able to kind of develop a new kind of aesthetic using those particular tools, or probably like DeepDream or I guess art in general is very broad, right? So in contemporary art, you can have anything from a sofa to kind of an elaborate sculpture, and I think maybe a lot of artists who come into AI art from the purely technological field, maybe they stay in the digital realm, so they kind of continue creating images of some format. And I think kind of maybe if more artists from different disciplines, like maybe those who work with like ceramics or with jewelry, maybe if they begin to kind of work with the technology and then kind of involve AI as part of the process as opposed to just to make the final result, then maybe there will be kind of a deeper variation in terms of kind of style. Don't know if that sort of answers your question.
So in some sense, one could say we're at the beginning and people just have to learn the instrument and what can be done and stuff like that also. Is that true?
Yes, because ultimately I think yeah, diversity is kind of a great thing, right? And if you have artists or creators from very different backgrounds beginning to work with those tools, they might have completely kind of different ideas, and they would make quite different work as opposed to artists who all went to the same school and kind of, all work with the same tools.
Do you think, like, what was your most surprising insight in the last couple of years? When you say, not in terms of like what's possible in terms of artworks, but in terms of how that works. Like, how does, like, you know, there's, it strikes me as, you're a curator, so there's artists, there's technologists. It strikes me as a very sort of actually traditional setup of the art world, where there is people producing artworks, and there is somebody who builds the organ, and somebody else who plays the organ, and somebody who does the program, telling people, look, I came up with a program with organists, right? Isn't it?
Sort of.
And it's not a bad thing.
Well, I think things have begun to change with NFTs, right? So I think artists have begun to become a lot more independent, right? So they are now kind of focused on gaining a following on like Twitter, maybe building their own Discord server, and then launching these drops of their artworks. So they don't really need curators so much. So now I think a lot more curators are working with different platforms like OpenSea or Feral File, or maybe like art blogs or places like that, to kind of include a curated section of artists. So yeah, I think things have kind of changed, because before the NFT era, it was much trickier for, I think, digital and media artists to make a living. They normally had to live off exhibitions or commissions and residencies. But now there's an opportunity for artists to actually kind of sell their work, and, you know, people kind of do buy it. At least that certainly happened with a lot of the artists I've been working with over the years. So because they already had a brand in the AI art space, as soon as they kind of began selling their work, it became interesting, and they had buyers.
Do you think it's a revolution indeed? Like, it's really revolutionary for the art world?
The
in a sense?
NFT?
Yeah.
Well, I think because I'm actually a bit confused as to why it sort of happened over the pandemic years, because I think kind of using blockchain to authenticate artwork has been around for like a long time. I mean, I certainly remember looking at it maybe in like 2012 and seeing projects like Sedition that sold kind of digital works online that I think were kind of blockchain authenticated. And there were startups in Berlin that were looking at that problem, but for some reason it never kind of caught on. And now I guess finally, like, you know, 9 or however many years later, it became a thing and successful. And I think that's great in many ways, because with digital images, it's useful to authenticate them, and also the way the systems work. If the work is kind of resold, then the artist gets a percentage of gets a royalty back, which I think is a very good development. But yeah, in some ways it feels that the NFT market is quite tied to the value of kind of Bitcoin and Ethereum. So yeah, I mean, of course, there was kind of a drop in the value of those coins earlier this year, and I think that also meant that there was a drop in the amount of kind of artists selling their work, because there was just not as much interest. And I guess we'll see how it develops, but I do think the underlying blockchain technology and its kind of ability to authenticate and kind of bring more money back to the artists is a good development. Though of course maybe that does kind of bring more challenges for galleries and curators who also, well, should maybe have some place in the ecosystem, but it would be changing.
And then because there's no hands raised, let me ask one question, which is sort of to point to the irony of the situation. So, we're a cultural data analytics group that includes a bunch of machine learning artists, inviting a qualitative, very successful analyst of the machine learning art world, asking you questions about like what's the shape of the situation. Which is quite interesting. So obviously it seems like the good old school way is the way how to do it. If you could wish, like, you know, Christmas wish, send a letter to Santa and say, oh, cultural analytics should give me X as a curator for contemporary art, for AI art and stuff like that. What do you think we should do?
Yeah, so I guess as a curator, one challenge I do have is sometimes finding a particular artist who, you know, fits a brief, right? So I have different kind of clients, and of course, now more than ever, it's very important to have kind of diverse representations and kind of all the speaker panels and exhibitions. So yeah, sometimes I spent a while searching for an artist from a kind of a South American continent. And of course, maybe there are like, I don't know, 5 or 10 artists who are kind of really well known, but also you don't want to always include them. So something that kind of helps to discover, yeah, artists who kind of fit my particular criteria.
Mm-hmm. There's something we could talk about later. So that we're building these, on the one hand, working on foundational things, how to do cartographies of large sets of artworks, but also the question is obviously how to make this interactive, because obviously giving people a figure or like an overview picture as a poster is just one thing. But I think this kind of use case that you just described is really interesting. It's like drug discovery in biology, where they have very similar systems and very similar. I mean, the people who do this are even called curators, which is quite funny. So, right, so dataset curators have the very same search problem, and obviously one can use the same kind of sophistication, which they are using for what we are interested in. In some sense, it's happening. There's all this computation, equation stuff going on in the background of Google, and they just engineered it away so we can actually give a prompt and something comes back. Yeah. But the science isn't there, so actually they build it away. The question is, I think, indeed, is there another way other than just prompting getting a list, which in some sense, what you're asking for is, and I think we should be very aware of this. If somebody searches something, people want the something, like they want their glasses, right? If they miss them, or they want to have a list of things, it's easy, right? So, but the question is like, what could be that result, basically? Is it an exhibition? Like, would it be an exhibition of a whole, like, you know, South American artists, AI artists, or a configuration of that, something you would have an easier time selecting and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, so I guess I'd probably be looking for, more names and how they are relevant to my search query, really. So, you know, probably, a better Google for my particular, I don't know, South American AI artist search. And also I think it does feel like it's a problem experienced by other kind of curators and institutions, because everybody's like, oh, do you know any artists from, you know, South Korea or some other region that they're maybe not so familiar with, because of course the narrative has been dominated for a long time, probably by US and Europe. So but I don't think like a particular, I don't know, exhibition format of these results is something that would be beneficial to me, because again, I would be looking to include the results as part of my workflow as opposed to kind of a product.
It's an intermediary product. That's interesting.
Yes.
Is that hand raised or?
Thank you for the talk. I mean, even I know most of the things uses. Because we've been doing AI for many years also.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, the DeepDream, we have a piece done that we shot with a drone with 2 cameras of 360. That is part of the Museum of History of Estonia.
Wow.
And it's in the permanent exhibition, and it's
Really cool.
It's collected by them, and it's in permanent show still. You need to look in a VR, and we actually did in 2017. And we make a perfect video, a perfect 360 video with this, and we render for over a month with 2 machines with the Titan X at that time. And yeah, I have this connects to what I want to say, that I think there is a problem with the type of finding artists in Twitter that I had been thinking a while. There is, everyone is not English speaking gender represented. And I have even a theory for that, that actually I had said to Max that the thing is related to the ads prices.
House prices?
The act of
art prices.
The attention economy.
Oh, okay.
Like basically there is some tweets that are promoted.
Yeah.
Means whenever you put attention economy, the countries that pay most, the timeline promotes it.
Yeah.
Which this is America first, because if you know by YouTube, for example, if you are a YouTuber in Spain, or you see in Spain, the ads are 10 times less than the US. Like if you have 100 users from the US, there is, for example, a ratio of $100. You see by in Spain it will be $10. Means this makes that whenever you tweet as a US artist something, you spread much more in the timeline than the rest of the artists. I have a really like for example, then the OpenAI, they have a really bias on who they gave the initial kind of invitations. They had a hard time in Asia. They did a workshop, the first workshop in Europe, and they thought that would be all flowers, and it was not. Because they gave all the invitations to the Americans and almost none to the Europeans.
I think, they gave one to Anna Ridler, but she is quite well known. And, it's a very, pretty project, so...
Yeah. But this is like... and they even actually said that the husband like this. There is some... And this makes, a disadvantage for the rest. Let's say, especially when you want to do like this, and that's a kind of a thing. It is controversial in a way, because when you are in a periphery, we always even say that we are in the periphery of academia also, like in Estonia. It is like this because, Nature had published an article recently. 90% of the US academics come from 20% of the Ivy League universities in America. No matter then if you are outside of America, if you want to get a professorship in America, you only have the 20%. Think about that this 20% is still filled by a lot by Americans, means you will have I think the 0.01% means I actually recently I was thinking to apply to some of these universities in America for some, and then it's this typical thing that are you underprivileged or something? I'm starting to think to actually check this list because I am not first native speaker in English. I don't know. I don't come from a privileged family. I think that it just the work you have to do for kind of being there is much more than in other cases, I think. There is no easy path. Even I can tell, I don't know if you know, but in 2014 we were commissioned by Google, me and Barbara, and we did the digital revolution, one of the field works, together with Zach Lieberman,
Wow.
and Carlson Smith, and we were in Barbican with very prominent work there.
Uh-huh.
And even this, like, if I would have been American, I'm sure everyone knows this. Actually, everyone knows most of this like work that we did. This one. Since then, more people know us. But this is like, I think in America, when you do something like this big, you immediately, everyone pick it up. But if you're from the courts, you don't pick it up so easy. And this is really like something that is kind of, yeah. As an artist, you have this thing of,
Yeah, it's a very kind of interesting point. And I guess like in my work, I have my own bias, right? Because I'm kind of based in the UK. And yeah, we have lots of great kind of AI companies and art schools nearby. So I think a lot of the artists on my list, like Memo Acton, Anna Riddler, Scott Eaton, Jake Elves, like a lot of them are UK based. And I actually don't think I have that many Americans in the list. But likewise, I also don't have enough people from, you know, like outside of Europe or yeah, outside of, I think, UK. Actually, but yeah.
It's quite interesting because it harks back to the company with which you started out, which there was this paper which was coming out of this company that looked at like how artists sort of like move over galleries, and they're one of the, I think the key result of this Freiberger and Barabasi science paper was that if you're a part of the system, you will be successful. And so the easier, you know, if you're born beside Gagosian Gallery, or you just hang out in a coffee shop of Obrist's Gallery in London, you have a much higher chance to become sort of a prominent artist than if you are sort of born in a small, medium size, and that means 6 million inhabitant city in India. Right? And so that is sort of something which I think is quite interesting. And if you turn that around, like obviously we can all complain about that, that, you know, it's easier than if you have a good idea at MIT as an undergrad student, you will make it to New York Times. If you have a really good idea as a postdoc or a PhD student at Tallinn University, you have to work hard to get there. So we can complain about this, but the inverse of it is also, I think, a really interesting one. If you think about the whole biennial art circus, but also now this, what's rolling out of the NFTs seems to have a similar bias. There is so much art that is off the radar. So a lot of the really rocking art that hasn't rocked the audience yet is not to be made, it's to be found. And the question is, how do we do that? I think that is a really interesting question, right? So that I think is a challenge from my perspective, cultural history, cultural analytics. If we can solve that, it would be amazing, I think.
I have the second question. It was more like, do you think that now that, I mean, they always say this AI is so like, it's not periodical something, but actually it's very intense, means like even in a few years it feels like decades maybe. Do you think that now we will start to see that some artists will not live on the wave of the new things, but will start to kind of like revise, because I mean, in my latest talks, actually, we have done some keynotes like talking about artists guiding their creativity and so on, and we always show the kind of graph of publication, academic publication, because you mentioned the big tech, but now I think it's also big tech and academia, like they actually equally contribute in models, and you can see in Archive how much progression is like just like this. Means I'm sure that we're only looking at the kind of part of the tail of everything that had been published. Like for example, in the latest works we did ceramics, like you were mentioning ceramics before, and we did ceramics with AI, and no many people had picked had done like basically text to image in shape. Because it had not been very visually finished, but we actually use it for doing ceramics. I know that Elena Sarin is being also using some ceramics, and I think besides me, us and Elena, I would say that because I'm looking around what he's doing, and I'm really curious, and I really, actually, I am like a curator because I know everyone else what is doing, not only like what I mean, like I know some artists that they really don't know what the ecosystem is doing, just focus on themselves, and they don't know, besides of these, so many artists, and that they basically, I think that this, if I told you about the text to mesh, for example, model, like it is very interesting, and not many people have I think no one has used it as an artist apart of us. But it's now coming because like now the Dream Fuse and this, like with stable diffusion, they're starting to do 3D models, and I see that now people are starting to kind of like starting to have curiosity versus this. I guess like this is an example, but I think that there will be now a little bit more back and forth to look some models that they had appeared in the. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so because, I find a lot of the art created in the past 2 years using all those text-to-image generators quite boring because, it's just kind of pretty pictures. And I do hope that kind of more artists will try and think, okay, what can I do that maybe incorporates those text-to-image or, text-to-video or whatever as part of my kind of broader process. So what can I do to kind of stand out? Because I think this is something that happened at some point in the GAN era, because when GANs kind of got very popular and everybody was training a GAN on something to generate some images, like you had to try and figure out how you would stand out. So I'm still waiting when this sort of happens in the text-to-image era. So maybe as there are kind of more models, maybe people will try and figure out how to use them in more different ways. I don't know.
Is there anything you're working on which you think is the next thing? Like, is it text to image, or is that a space one can even navigate, because that is moving so fast, right? Isn't it?
Well, it feels to me that people are kind of working a lot on text to something, right? Because there's also, I think, text to audio, text to video stuff, and I think in general maybe other kind of networks that connect different kind of modes. So that seems to be kind of the focus area at the moment, because of course images have been improving over the years, and also same with kind of text. When I was kind of getting into the field, I was also kind of experimenting with art, and I was kind of generating some text using recurrent neural networks, and they were like rubbish compared to what you can get now. So they were kind of overly philosophical, and I guess they had their own glitches. But for some reason, I personally maybe found them less kind of interesting, even though I really like the visual glitches in that art form. Mm-hmm. But I actually think the more complex and successful kind of text generations are maybe more kind of interesting in some way. Because, for example, I was at an event on Saturday with Ross Goodwin, who is one of the, I guess, pioneering artists in the kind of text generation space. And he is the author of Sunspring, which is, I think, a sci-fi film short where the text that the artists were speaking was all kind of AI generated. And now he's kind of working with a platform called the Verse, which kind of, I think they sell AI generated poetry on the blockchain. So he brought this camera that he's had for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now, that looks at an image and then kind of generates a poem for it. Mm-hmm. And the quality of that is kind of much higher now. So you can also say write 10 words, and it would provide you with a text. And yeah, if I would have brought my other bag with me, then I would have showed you the poem that kind of that was generated, but the level is kind of completely different now.
So we're going to a severe increase in quality, basically, across all these things.
Yeah, so image and text are now really good, and I guess the other fields are also kind of catching up. And I think there's also a lot of interest in kind of this whole metaverse thing and all those kind of gaming studios.
Okay. How about the metaverse?
No, what about the installations? Because he's an installation. This is an installation,
Yeah,
and
doing the installations.
there is so many installations now with AI. What you show is also it shows like there is no installation. This is an image.
Well, because I show, the artists frequently also who I work with and whose work I kind of like best, related to also my personal taste. And I just really like kind of visual screen-based art. So occasionally in those talks, I also include the works done by artists working with text, because in some ways there's kind of a lot more diversity, because it's something that can become as part of a play or an AI improv piece. So that's also quite interesting. But I think for some reason, maybe I'm too kind of traditional in the way I view art, but I have like less interest in interactive installations or VR-based projects, even though I have like various clients that do kind of request that. So in some exhibitions, of course, this is something that becomes part of it. So I think in the Leicester Art and AI Festival, we showed some of Harshit's kind of interactive masks. Also I think I brought his work over to Dubai when I did a conference exhibition there. And so ultimately there are artists also kind of working on these kind of fields. It's just not my personal focus area.
That is a potentially very wide field, right? Like if you look at I was teaching in a university department that had a very large fraction of game designers and computer animators, which was sort of like pottery people and porcelain people. And one of the interesting things is like they all self-identify as artists. This is a very important point. And they don't make a difference between sort of fine artists and that. They consider themselves very much at that level. And, you know, if you did draw Alvin the Chipmunk or whatever special effect in Batman, you have a higher exposure, people pay more money. And, you know, it's like, this is a really interesting thing. And so at the same time, they're totally not part of that art system. And so is that something where you, actually coincidentally, I had a conversation a couple of days ago with somebody who comes from that world. And so is that something where you see, is there sort of, sort of a kind of merging going on? Is the art world moving that direction? As you say, you have some interactive masks, or is it going the other way around, that you pull out people that are sort of just sticking out because, you know, if they do an awesome bat swarm in Batman, so they need to be in the Gagosian gallery or whatever. So do you see, is there a kind of like bristling tension between metaverse and regular gallery system art, or like?
Well, I think when there was the NFT boom, all of the auction houses started to kind of develop some sort of NFT link. So I think Sotheby's had some sort of like metaverse platform on Decentraland where they kind of replicated the physical galleries in the virtual space, so you could like wander around and see all of it. And I think also places like maybe the Pace Gallery, and there's a gallery we have in London called Unit Gallery, which has been like quite successful and trendy over the past few years, and now they've kind of also gone into this Web3 space. So I mean, galleries, they're also about making money, right? And given kind of the size of the interest, and I think the NFT space, like they're realizing that, okay, this is perhaps the future, so they should kind of invest in it. yeah, so it makes sense to me that they would kind of begin working there.
Interesting. So this is it's a very interesting point. So if you sell something at a gallery, you need to make the premise to the collector that is in some way unique. So they pay for something.
Yeah.
And so now at the same time, we're at this moment when there is ever more production.
Yes.
And you got things like, so here's a quote by Frida Nake, who was sort of a pioneer computer artist, who said, like, at some point we realized everything is just sort of a sample from a frequency distribution. So every artwork the computer produces is just another sample from the frequency distribution. Once you understand what the frequency distribution is, it becomes very boring. And then some of his colleagues went back and just brush, canvas, paint, no computer. So do you think there is something similar going on, or will you at some point just sell the frequency distribution and not the artwork, basically?
Well, I think some artists have tried to sell it as a system. So Mario Klingemann, so I think with the first auction sale he had with Sotheby's, maybe it was in like 2019 or something, he sold kind of the particular, I think, his version of the model that was kind of generating the images. And I don't know if that was kind of understandable to...
He saw an installation. He saw this installation of two screens
Yeah.
with the computer.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't just kind of the individual image or video as is usual. It was
The whole system.
I think it's generative, as far as I understand. It's not a video, it's like generating this like in real time, endless.
Yes, so what I mean is kind of is the system that was kind of generating, as opposed to being kind of a one image or a certain video, which is, I think, more common, even though there are, I think, other examples of kind of artists selling the system.
What you were saying was that you're not sure if the person who bought it did understand that he was buying the whole system and not the piece, basically, or is that?
I'm not sure if they valued it.
Okay.
If it was kind of as exciting and special to them, because so there was this, of course, Edmond de Bellamy, or whatever, this kind of obvious piece that went up for auction at Christie's in, I think, October 2018, and it was sold for, I can't remember now, it was like maybe $400,000. Yeah, so that was kind of the first big commercial kind of AI art sale, and which I think placed more interest in AI art in general. And then I think Sotheby's was like, okay, whose work can we sell? So they sold Mario's work, and I think that went for, I don't know, was it like 40,000 or 69, you remember?
And actually, the story that is not told in the media is that Mario Klingemann has a collector in Madrid that is backing up him for some years, solo collection.
Solo, yeah.
I saw it before the auction, and basically what happened is that he commissioned three of those, and the collector put it in the Sotheby's to sell. Means maybe the one who bought in Sotheby's, I'm not sure if he knows what he's buying about. The solo definitely knows what he's buying about. I mean, I cannot speak for, I'm saying for the one who bought, because I don't know who bought. But the solo collection really not.
Yes, I suppose what I'm just saying is that the typical collector base that Sotheby's and Christie's have, or maybe some of these, bankers or rich people sometimes have art advisors who specialize maybe in contemporary art in general, but not necessarily in computer art. So, maybe that's why it also so happened that Christie selected this horrible work by Obvious, which was this kind of badly generated GAN image. And that's why that image kind of sold for a lot of money, because there was no right curator or art advisor or historian in place at kind of anywhere in that point. And so that's why that's why I'm saying that I'm not sure if it was an important factor.
The price, I mean, when I saw the price, I said, okay, you almost sold for the
production price.
For the production price. I'm not maybe, but close.
Yeah.
Like they make very nice furniture. I had looked impressed on the thing.
Yeah.
Two high quality screens.
Yeah.
With a very custom made furniture to host the computer inside.
Yeah.
Inside there is a powerful gaming computer to run this. I mean, I don't know the specs exact, but this has some cost.
Yes, of course.
The other one was just like maybe very good print, but just like I'm not sure how quality is the print or something, but just like a print.
Yeah.
For how much quality it is, a maximum maybe 2,000 euros or 3,000 euros print at the size it is. I think what it costs more is maybe the frame that they put that looks like ore.
Yes.
Honestly speaking. With the controversy that the thing the training set was from Robin Barrat and everything else is history. So.
Yes. Yeah, it was an interesting moment kind of back in time, but now I've removed it from the
I
the slides.
think it's good to remove it. It's just like
But yeah, I remember Mario was saying it's like this piece of toilet paper that is now stuck to kind of the AI art history.
well, luckily, maybe people doesn't talk at them anymore.
You're in a dangerous position regarding that, right? Because people are listening to you and you make the selections, and it's like Gideon, who gave us all these houses that every architecture student has to study because he put them in his book.
Well, there are other curators, right? And I think that's also why in the beginning I kind of try and explain where I come from, that I'm not a typical, you know, I don't have a PhD in art history. I'm not like professing to be a scholar of computer art. It's kind of, it's just so happened that I'm in this space. I've worked with quite a few artists who've now become quite successful, and kind of based on my experiences, this is what I kind of find interesting and worth presenting. But I think that's kind of true for many different people. Everybody will have their own kind of bias, right? So, yeah.
Any more questions? Any more questions
I have a stupid question. Can I ask?
There's no stupid questions. Go on.
No, again, kind of like coming outside of this this realm, I'm kind of like really curious. Do you see? Is there a specific way that AI art comments the contemporary world? Of course, I can see the comments on technology and on kind of like development of algorithms and maybe kind of like databases that they use. They kind of like shows certain interesting perspectives from there. But is there something that, how does it go, you know, if we think about it in a wider perspective? Do you see, is there some specific way it comments, or is it kind of like depends on artist and so on?
Yeah, so as you say, I think a lot of artists have kind of used AI maybe to comment on the technology, like I kind of showed you some of the kind of problems with GANs and so on, and then also on the applications of technology. Like maybe I missed a few slides, but there were a few kind of showcasing how you can hide from facial recognition, because of course that is a concern, and I think that became also particularly popular around the time when there were lots of Black Lives Matter protests. So there was an actual risk for people, if a photograph was taken of them, that a facial recognition system would be used to recognize them, and then they could suffer consequences. So yeah, there were certainly kind of all those projects, and then. I mean, it's probably kind of up to the artists how they work with these kind of AI tools and what they're kind of, interested in, what preoccupations they have, I think.
So that is an interesting question one could extend, right? So this thing is, do we see this art that is not recognizable by face recognition, which, you know, successful, you turn your face in like a mandala of faces, you put your nose on your t-shirt, which is all affordances we don't have. While in Iran, people are picked from the street because they order pizza from their friend's place. So, because some camera picked you up. So how do we, how much is this practical that art comments like this, and how much is the actual impact? So is there, do you think, is there, do you see there's a lot of art that is sort of riding on the public discussion, or is art still having the same, or not the same, but the impact of Joseph Beuys standing on the street corner of two Neapolitan neighborhoods, which then after 50 years for the first time start talking to each other. That's like impactful art, I think. So the question is, in how much can this kind of AI art really have an impact on society in a sense? Or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so all those kind of projects about avoiding facial recognition, it's all about whether they can be used by those people who feel that they need them. So they need to be kind of very easy to kind of execute. And so I think like with the earlier, I think facial recognition systems, if you had like some crazy like hairdo or certain marks on your face, then you could fool it. But of course now the systems are more advanced, and I think I've seen some artists or designers come up with various kind of t-shirts or other systems. But then again, whether they would be kind of affordable or successful and easily reachable enough for those people who need them is a good question. But I think sometimes some of these AI art projects become kind of very kind of successful in the media space, and they shine light on certain issues. Like I think there was the project with Trevor Paglen and Kate Crawford. I think the ImageNet roulette that probably showcased the bias in the data set or something like that. And I remember there was a lot of kind of attention on that project.
Do you think that people appreciate, like the normal public, appreciate more the AI art, or they actually have a bias against? Because like I was in Bilbao talking to some psychologists that he published a paper in Frontiers of Psychology and AI, a paper recently beginning of this year, and they published that actually in their study, it might be true, it might be that they publish that they have, like, the people has bias against the AI art. Like they make these two groups and they put the same AI art. I actually look at the supplement material and I look which they show. I didn't like it. Like aesthetically wise, I think they didn't choose like a good art. But anyway, whether the art was good or no, they put two groups and they did the same number of questionnaires. And what it came out is that as soon as they said that the people that is a human made the same art, they rated higher. And as soon as they said that it's like AI made, they rated lower. Which actually kind of, I wrote first the paper, then I contact, and I happened to the ceramic that I mentioned before. We did it in Bilbao, and then I wrote to her and I met and I showed the work and that we were doing with ceramics and AI, and she liked it so much and so on. And she explained me a few kind of insights on this, and it was very nice. But I was pretty worried after because I'm doing a lot of AI art, and I'm just like, okay, the general public will not like it. But I mean, maybe after this weekend, that someone who knows about that bought one of our AI sculptures, then maybe I'm less worried. But I'm sure I was worried.
Yeah, but I always feel kind of, okay, the media is obsessed with kind of saying AI made this artwork. So they always want to kind of minimize the human involvement. But I think with a lot of artists who do work with AI, there is quite a lot of human involvement, right? Because they decide they want to work with AI, they kind of pick the data set, pick the algorithm, and then, kind of optimize the algorithm for whatever generation they want, and then they frequently curate the output. So there is like quite a lot of human involvement. I think even now, arguably with the prompt, you could probably say that you do a lot of kind of prompt writing and testing and maybe post-processing on the artwork. So it's just, I think, a way of kind of narrating that in a different way. Because I think I'd be the same as the general public if it is kind of an AI generated without kind of any context and meaning. I'd also rate it lower than if it was human made. I think that's kind of natural.
It's the same as if you think about in the history, right? Photography has been bashed by that. Plaster casts have been bashed by that. Camera obscura things where you just redraw what you see on the screen.
Have the Hersman, the Adobe researcher, he make a very nice keynote that doesn't allow to record. He did that sometimes, and he is like selling this.
So he can be honest.
And there, and he can be very honest. He put very nice examples how photography took 70 years to enter contemporary art, and he is drawing the same parallel with AI in a way that AI art to be broadly accepted, they might take a similar time. Let's see, history will tell, but
Yes.
the truth is that actually photography and AI they have a lot of similarities. And even with the text prompts, they have a lot of similarities because they say, oh, text prompts now is very easy, simple, you put the text on, which a lot of people neglected that you can actually do with the usual like interface, but you also can heavily modify the algorithm inside, which I believe that now the more interesting things will come when people modify the algorithm, because now, for example, you can see from August to now, the methods of navigating into stable diffusion, even if it's a text-to-image system, that you can do in-pairing, out-pairing, videos with prompts. The methods, I think they count now around 20 kinds. Means you can do a part of text, many more things apart, no? That will. What I'm saying is that there is a lot of possibilities that artists can choose, and then even if the possibilities, and this is like the camera, you can have like camera, you can just like put more time, less time, more ISO, less ISO. No? At the end, it's the same. And then what it boils down is the intention of the artist and the narrative that you are saying. Like if someone builds a nice narrative and so on, and doesn't matter if you take 1 second to produce or you spend 1 month, because that's what every year then the best photo of the year or whatever in artistic or in photojournalism. Sometimes they are waiting that some difficult animal, rare animal arrives to make a photo, but sometimes it's just like they are in the right moment, the right place, and they make the photo and just like have something that is unique. No? And I think this uniqueness and intention, it's just like, I think actually the intention is the main thing in the AI. It will be all this. What the artist wants to do with that. And from this is included the narrative and so on. Are you agree with me?
I'm not sure about the intent. I always find the narrative the most important part, and I think it could be the curator or the gallerist who makes the narrative, because not all artists are very skilled in self-promotion and communicating the right way, even though they may have like other talents. And maybe you're right, they still spend like forever kind of making the work, but they're kind of unable to translate it in a way that kind of appeals to audiences. So I think sometimes it's a combination of perspectives that can kind of make an artwork more valuable and meaningful.
But then if it's like this, you are not out of job, because then the curators is normally the one that they make meaning making on the on many works. Also, like when you put it in a group show and then you just like some work that it has some other meaning, but then you just when you put in context with other works, then they just like might add some new layer on the work. Or when you do a text that just like look at from another angle. That's what we're just having. That's why the word curator has been kind of like sometimes you're more important than the artists in the exhibitions.
Yeah, the star curators. Yeah, like Hans-Ulrich Obrist.
Yeah, I had in mind the same one.
Because he's also, I think, not also, but
Interested in AI?
no, because I think he studied business in St. Gallen in Switzerland or something, I think. So, well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I got the impression that he came from like a very kind of business background, and then for some reason he ended up being kind of very like prominent.
But talking about the AI now, the Serpentine have this like AI lab, and
Yes.
they have a...
Yeah, they do. I was doing some work for them before.
So the last time I met him was at the DLD conference in Munich last summer,
Okay.
which had Memo Atkin having this huge video wall. You know, the video walls where you walk past and they sort of give so much warmth after you can heat the room. And so this massive piece, it was, I think, about 8 meters long or something like that, and like from top to floor to bottom. And one of the interesting things that I learned there is Memo Atkin now seems to run an operation which utterly smells like an architecture studio, basically. So it's a massive enterprise. Yeah. So there's
like Refik
Anadol.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he was present too. So Refik Anadol, I'm sorry. So he was running this kind of like architectural style studio, and so now here's the thing. The oeuvre of Zaha Hadid is put in contact with Refik Anadol via Hans Ulrich Obrist. And now sort of there's AI art produced that sort of like draws on the entire sort of inheritance of Zaha Hadid, which you can imagine what that entails, like just by the simple embedding. The training set is sort of like nobody can afford. The amount of energy and money going into the computation, going into the presentation, nobody can afford. The social network of Hans Ulrich Obrist, nobody has. So you're in the same situation as, sort of, Saatchi and Damien Hirst. There's art produced that simply by production is so expensive that it will be the most expensive AI art that will be there. And so then the key question is obviously all this did we talk about this thing that we always talk about when we talk AI art, no matter who we is like, artists can be much more independent, they can put their stuff on Twitter and the blockchain, and they can sell their own stuff. But that kind of organization, impossible. I mean, you just can't get there as a regular person, right?
I mean, not that every tweet is done by the community manager, but I'm sure that the studio is so large. But he just recently posted that he bought a VTX station, I think even better than one we have.
Oh wow! But yeah, I remember. So I think actually, Refik Anadol is probably an architect by training.
No, I think he studied at UCLA. But he got fascinated in Los Angeles with the architects, and then he did this in the Opera House in Los Angeles. He had this idea that the building has to dream, and then he did with this cooperation with.
So he also did a Google residency and kind of a variety of other things. So I think. Yeah, I don't know. I always had the feeling that he had a strong architecture background. Certainly the type of skills he had are very much typical kind of architecture skills. And because, kind of making all these kind of 3D type of things. I remember, visiting him in his studio back before he was so famous. And so I guess he just has a good business head. And as kind of the money was coming in, he figured out how to make the most of it.
I think that has a good business head. He was in America and he made some projects there and managed to get paid as an American rate. I think that in Europe, this kind of a scale we don't touch. He did this opera house with Frank Gehry.
Yes.
And then after that, he did this one that is the famous one that is like a building with a corner to the wings of San Francisco. That is a permanent installation. I think this was commissioned like some maybe million or some millions.
Just a wait, right?
And then he could finance this, and for some moment he had the entire community, the best developers of PPP, on payroll. That they developed him the particle system that now you see everywhere. But good actually is open source. Like people now can download this particular system, or at least the early version of it. But it is really interesting. I met him when he was doing more mappings in Ars Electronica, testing at 5 in the morning because we had rehearsed for Saturday night on the day before, and the slots were in the middle of the night, and that's the first time I met him.
Yeah.
When he was a student in Istanbul. We had friends in common.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm talking about 2008 or 9.
Yeah, so kind of before I met him. Yeah. Mm.
Talked for 2 hours. Thank you very much for your brilliant overview and start into this discussion.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, thank you for the invitation and all the questions. Yeah, really good to talk.
Thank you. Is there any goodbye question from the audience online, or no? Okay, so yeah, then let's close it down and let's meet again at the next Open Lab seminar, which will come up. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.